So hi everyone, and thanks for attending the session today. I'm delighted to be speaking to you about this particular topic, and I find it to be something that's increasingly relevant as the whole issue of urban transport evolves. And as you all know, e-scooters are pretty common on the streets now. We see them zooming by us on footpaths and on the road and in cycle lanes, and the presence of those vehicles seems to be really growing rapidly, and it's clear that they're no longer a passing trend. And indeed, many people of all ages and all walks of life are seen using e-scooters as a mode of transportation today. Um, their popularity does continue to rise, and so too does the importance of understanding the legal landscape surrounding their use. This talk is intended to give you a broad overview of the current legal position on e-scooters in both Ireland and the UK. The topic is still in its relative infancy, and it is one that's likely to attract more attention in the coming years as e-scooters become more common. And I suppose we can expect to see a greater focus on regulations and safety measures and potential liabilities tied to their use also. One of the key concerns that I would like to address today is the age group of some of the individuals operating e-scooters. Unfortunately, we're already seeing a number of incidents that highlight the risk of negligent operation of e-scooters, and I think that it's fair to predict that it will lead to an increase in personal injury cases concerning e-scooters going forward. So, with all that in mind, let's look into the current state of the law and explore what lies ahead for that rapidly growing sector. So we're just going to talk about the Irish jurisdiction first. And up until 2024, the legal status of e-scooters on public roads in Ireland was a pretty grey area, and there was a number of uncertainties surrounding their use. At the time, it appeared that e-scooters were classified as mechanically propelled vehicles, meaning that they were subject to the same legal requirements as other motor vehicles. This included an obligation to have insurance and undergo an NCT and meeting various safety and regulatory standards. The ambiguity surrounding the classification created a lot of confusion for users and the authorities, and it was unclear whether e-scooters could legally be used on public roads without complying with strict regulations. However, there was a significant shift post 2024 when new legislation clarified their status. Under the updated regulations, e-scooters are now fully entitled to share the roads with vehicles. This change means that e-scooters can now be used on public roads, albeit under a different set of rules and requirements. Unlike traditional motor vehicles, e-scooters are not subject to the same stringent regulations, such as mandatory insurance or NCT. And while this makes e-scooters more accessible and more user-friendly, it also raises questions between the balance between accessibility and safety, especially given the relative leniency in their regulatory requirements. You'll see that prior to the changes that were ushered in 2024 under Section 3 of the Road Traffic Act 1961, e-scooters arguably came within B of the definition of mechanically propelled vehicle, and that definition is set out for you there in the slide. And had the position remained as such, it seems that the use of e-scooters on public roads would not have been possible, as amongst other things, a minimum of third-party insurance would have been required, and that was simply not on offer in respect of e-scooters. And it does appear to be the case that e-scooter operators would have also been required to possess a driving licence and to register the vehicle as you would for all other vehicles. So nonetheless, despite all that, there are many e-scooter users that were not discouraged, and e-scooters continued to become more commonplace on public roads. A 2021 Road Safety Authority observation study on e-scooters produced some pretty alarming data. The RSA had originally recorded video footage between the 1st to the 20th of December 2021 in order to capture helmet wearing of cyclists and motorcyclists in areas in Cork, Galway, Limerick and Dublin city centre. However, what they did capture on the footage was that 12% of the e-scooters users seen on the footage used pedestrian footpaths while operating their e-scooters. 73% of users were not wearing a helmet, and 77% of users were not wearing high visibility gear. Obviously, those statistics were troubling both for pedestrians and for other road users, and it's clear that thorough regulation of the use of those vehicles was desperately needed at that point. So cue the enactment of the Road Traffic and Roads Act 2023, Part 12, and that was the relevant part for our purposes, and that was commenced on the 20th of May 2024. The 2023 Act created a new category of mechanically propelled vehicles called personal powered transporters, or PPTs. As appears from the 2023 Act, Section 16 thereof extensively amended inter alia Section 3 of the 1961 Act and inserted a new definition of a PPT as follows. And we just see the definition there: a vehicle designed and constructed for the carriage of a single person, not designed to be constructed for restricted mobility or for the carriage of goods. They have a maximum weight, they have a maximum design speed of no less than 6 kilometers and no greater than 25 kilometers per hour. And there's some other specifications there that to have regard to. Now, one of the major clarifications arising from the 2023 Act was that PPTs are not subject to the same requirements as MPVs, so mechanically propelled vehicles. So, for example, PPT users do not have to pay motor tax in respect of their vehicle, and that is captured in Section 1 of the Finance Excise Duties Vehicles Act 1952 as amended, which applies only to MPVs. Further, PPT users did not need to register their vehicle, nor do they need to hold an NCT certificate. And that is by the definition of vehicle in the Road Traffic National Car Test Regulations 2017 as amended. And in that regard, the definition is a vehicle means a mechanically propelled vehicle having 4 wheels used for the carriage of passengers and their luggage, with a design speed greater than 25 kilometers an hour, and which has a maximum of 8 seats excluding the driver's seat. Further, PPT users do not require insurance. And in that regard, you can see the parameters of the type of vehicle to which the compulsory motor insurance obligation now applies in Section 56(9)(a) of the 1961 Act. This implements the requirements of the Compulsory Motor Insurance Directive. That definition is that a vehicle means any motor vehicle propelled exclusively by mechanical power. And there are some other elements to that definition, but that's the most important part. And then finally, PPT users do not need to hold a valid driving license. However, even with the enactment of the 2023 Act, the position wasn't fully clear, as the explicit term e-scooter remained absent from that Act, and accordingly regulations needed to be made. So we achieved full clarity on the position of e-scooters with the introduction of 2 key pieces of legislation: the Road Traffic Electric Scooters Regulations 24, and that's SI 199 of 2024, and then the Road Traffic Use of Personal Powered Transporters Regulations 24. So those regulations came into effect on the 20th of May 2024, and they provided some much needed clarity regarding the use of e-scooters on public roads. So the e-scooter regulations established that e-scooters fall under the definition of PPTs, and this effectively recognised them as a specific category of vehicle. As a result of that, e-scooters on public roads are not prohibited, but they are subject to certain conditions, and those conditions are set out in the e-scooter regulations, meaning that e-scooters can only be legally used in public spaces if they comply with those rules outlined in that legislation. So this development has provided a clearer framework for users and authorities, and it does ensure that e-scooters can be operated somewhat in a safe and regulated manner. So accordingly, it is entirely legal now to use e-scooters on a public road in Ireland, provided that they meet the requirements of the regulations and are used in accordance therewith. So some of those requirements are that they're operated at maximum 20 kilometers per hour or under, depending on the relevant speed limit. So in the Act, up to 25 kilometers per hour is allowed, but clearly the Minister thought it appropriate to reduce that a bit. They cannot be used for the carriage of goods, and they cannot be used by more than one person at a time. And unfortunately, that's not something that seems to be adhered to very often. E-scooters can also not be modified to increase their speed or power beyond 400 watts. And they cannot be modified so that the technical or physical characteristics of the vehicle no longer correspond to the manufacturer's design specifications or the information contained on the manufacturer's plate. E-scooters cannot be modified in any manner that compromises the safety of the scooter, and they cannot be used for the purposes of towing other vehicles. They can't be fitted with a seat, and again, we do see a few seats going around. They must meet dimensional, weight, manufacturing and operating requirements. For example, they cannot be made in a way that allows them to exceed 20 kilometers an hour. They have to be fitted with front and rear brakes. They have to possess a white front lamp and a red rear lamp. They have to have a bell essentially and reflectors on all sides. Interestingly, they are not required to be fitted with indicators, but if they are fitted with indicators, there are specifications provided for under the regulations in relation to them. So just turning to the road traffic and parking regulations, they were also heavily amended by the e-scooter regulations, and they specify that e-scooters must drive on the left-hand side of the road. They should be driven in a cycle lane where available. They can drive in bus lanes and in pedestrianised areas. They cannot drive more than two abreast, and they must yield at zebra crossings. Once again, like I have to say that it is concerning that e-scooters are allowed to operate in pedestrianised areas. There's some anecdotal evidence that these vehicles are often ridden at very high speeds and they sometimes exceed the legal speed limits to which they're supposed to be restricted. And this does create a significant safety risk for pedestrians, and it raises some concerns about the adequacy of the current regulations in that regard. It's also important to highlight that the minimum age for requirement for using e-scooters in a public place is 16, and presumably that's intended to ensure that users have the necessary maturity and physical capability to operate these vehicles safely. However, in practice, we often see much younger children riding e-scooters in public places, and this suggests that there's an issue with the enforcement of the age limit, and that's fairly concerning from a safety perspective. There have been a number of reports of serious injuries, including fatal accidents in Ireland so far, and many of these have involved minors using e-scooters. And these incidents raise significant concerns about the appropriateness of the current age restriction. It could be argued that the age limit should be increased not only to protect the safety of the riders, but also to make underage users more visible and easily identifiable to Gardaí. And with stricter enforcement, it may be possible to reduce those risks. And that is both the risks to the riders themselves, who are fairly vulnerable, and to other road users. There is now a number of offences pertaining to the use of e-scooters. Many of those are included in Schedule 7 to the Road Traffic Act 2010, Part 3, Fixed Charges Offences Regulations. And they set out that there's a number of offences attracting a €50 fixed charge penalty for e-scooter users. Those offences include driving an electric scooter in a public place without reasonable consideration for other people using the place, a failure to stop an electric scooter when required to do so by a member of Gardaí, using an electric scooter to carry goods, using an electric scooter to carry passengers, using an electric scooter equipped with a seat, modifying an electric scooter in a manner that's prohibited in the regulation. And I think that's something that is fairly clear that it's being contravened on a regular basis. And there's also offences to do with towing other vehicles or equipment, using unroadworthy scooters or exceeding the speed limit, and failures to obey traffic lights and signage, and failures to obey cycle traffic lights, and also, interestingly, holding a mobile phone while driving an e-scooter, so similar to driving a car. Other offences relating to e-scooters in the 1961 Act include driving an e-scooter in a public place while unfit to do so. So that may be due to the influence of alcohol, for example, exceeding the speed limit, and driving a defective vehicle holding onto other vehicles. Gardaí also have some specific powers in relation to PPTs under the Road Traffic Act, and they include under Section 20, which allows a Garda to test a PPT by driving it for a reasonable time and distance, or to require the operator of the e-scooter to do so. And Section 108 allows a Garda to demand the name, address, and the date of birth of a person in charge of a PPT who is suspected of having committed any crime or offence, or having been concerned with or involved with a collision or other event that caused injury to a person or to their property. And in a relatively recent development, in August 2024, the National Transport Authority of Ireland advised all of its transport operators, including bus, Coach, Lewis, Dart, and train services to prohibit the carriage of e-scooters on their vehicles. The decision was made in response to concerns about the quality control of e-scooter manufacturing, particularly with regard to the vulnerability of their lithium-ion batteries and the close proximity to ground level. And there are fears there that they're prone to damage during transit, and that raises concerns regarding like possible fires and toxic fumes and explosions on public transport. That particular ban came into effect on the 7th of October 2024. Obviously, it was met with considerable frustration from many e-scooter users and retailers. And e-scooter owners in particular were understandably very disappointed by the restrictions as it limited their ability to use public transport while carrying their e-scooters. And that would have been a reason why many people would have gotten them in the first place. And at the time that the ban took effect, the then Transport Minister suggested that the ban would be reviewed by the NTA in early 2025. Although, to my knowledge, nothing has been done to date about that. And we'll just move on now to discuss the position in the UK in respect of e-scooters. So I think the legal stance on e-scooters in the UK has always been quite clear, and not much has changed regarding the regulations surrounding them. As of now, it remains illegal to use a private e-scooter on public roads in the UK, as they're classified as motor vehicles under Section 1851C of the Road Traffic Act 1988. I think the sub-definition of motorcycle is probably apposite. It refers to any mechanically propelled vehicle with fewer than four wheels and an unladen weight of not exceeding 410 kilograms, provided it's not an invalid carriage. And as a result of that classification, e-scooters are subject to the same legal requirements as other motor vehicles. So that includes obligations for tax, MOT, and insurance and registration. For an e-scooter to be legally used on public roads, all those requirements would have to be met, and that's not really feasible for e-scooter operators in the UK. As such, without the ability to fulfil those requirements, the use of e-scooters privately on public roads remains prohibited. And in short, the legal framework surrounding e-scooters in the UK, it has remained pretty unchanged unless there's significant reforms to the existing laws. The widespread use of e-scooters on public roads will continue to be restricted. And these are pretty significant legal barriers that prevent e-scooters from becoming an accessible mode of transport on public roads in the UK under the current legislation. So in an effort to explore some new forms of travel and to address challenges posed by reduced public transport during the COVID-19 pandemic, the UK government introduced the Electric Scooter Trials and Traffic Signs, Coronavirus Regulations and General Directions 2020. And those regulations were designed to facilitate trials of rental e-scooters with the aim of testing their viability as a green mode of transport and providing an alternative to crowded public transport systems. The 2020 regulations came into force on the 4th of July 2020, and that marked a significant shift in the legal landscape in the UK regarding e-scooters. The 2020 regulations amended several pieces of legislation, including the Vehicle Excise and Registration Act 94, the Road Traffic Act 1988, the Road Traffic Regulations Act, and the Motor Vehicles Driving Licence Regulations 1999. The amendments specifically enabled the legal use of rental e-scooters on public roads in various regions across England. The regulatory change ushered in by this was intended to create a framework for the controlled use of e-scooters, and it allowed authorities to test their integration into urban transport systems. It was seen as a type of pilot initiative. It was designed to gather data and to assess the practicality and safety of e-scooters as a long-term transport solution. Those trials are now live in 22 regions in England, and they've been extended 4 times, with the most recent extension running to March 26. And interestingly, in August 2024, the first e-scooter rental scheme run by the company Bolt went live in Ireland and County Wexford. However, unlike the position in the UK, where there was quite a rapid and wide extension of the rental scheme, it appears that the Wexford scheme has been the only scheme to launch in Ireland to date, and I could not find any information to suggest that that position is likely to change. So notably, those renting e-scooters in the UK as part of the e-scooter trials are still required to hold a Category Q driving licence, with a special definition being inserted into Regulation 3 of the 1999 regulations. There's nothing particularly notable in there apart from the fact that it explicitly distinguishes e-bikes by stating that an e-scooter is one that's not fitted with pedals. And you'll see that definition there, and it just gives the different details of the definition of e-scooters in the UK. So in further contrast to the Irish position, there is a minimum of third-party insurance required in respect of the use of e-scooters, although it's not actually required to be held by the individual user. And in practice, it's arranged by the rental operator. And I have given Lawrence these slides so that you can access that link if you want to read more. We do see some similarities to the Irish position. Rental e-scooter riders were specifically exempted from the use of helmets by the insertion of a new paragraph 3 into Regulation 4 of the Motorcycles Protective Helmets Regulations 1998, excuse me. This is surprising given the high numbers of severe and other head injuries sustained by UK e-scooter users in the UK. The Department of Transport produced a fact sheet in 2022, which outlined that there were 1,402 collisions involving e-scooters compared to 1,352 in 2021. So that's quite a big jump in a year. Of all of the collisions involving e-scooters, 341 included only one e-scooter with no other vehicles involved in the collision. So there were single vehicles collisions compared to 324 in 2021. There were nearly 1,500 casualties in collisions involving e-scooters compared to 1,400 in 2021. And of all the casualties and collisions involving e-scooters, 1,149 were e-scooter users compared to 1,102 in 2021. So there's a fairly large proportion of them are actually e-scooter users. And there were 12 people killed in collisions involving e-scooters, and 11 of those were the e-scooter riders themselves, compared to 10 in 2021. And there were 440 seriously injured and 1,040 slightly injured in collisions involving e-scooters, compared to 418 and 1,006 respectively in 2021. So by way of a further example of a similarity to the Irish position, an amendment was made to the Road Vehicles Registration and Licensing Regulations 2002 to exempt rental e-scooters from the requirement of being registered. So that's just another similarity. And I just want to kind of circle back just to the issue of insurance, because there's one point I would like to make in relation to the growing use of e-scooters, and it raises pretty serious concerns about liability and access to justice for victims of accidents involving those vehicles. We've established that e-scooter operators in Ireland are not required to carry insurance. This is a pretty big legislative gap that presents a fairly significant issue when it comes to compensating individuals who have suffered loss, injury, or damage as a result of an accident involving an e-scooter. In the absence of mandatory insurance, the question naturally arises, like, who's responsible for covering the cost of damages, medical expenses, and other such losses incurred by innocent third parties. And under ordinary circumstances, of course, the Motor Insurers Bureau, I should say, of Ireland exists precisely to address those types of situations and provides for compensation for victims of accidents that involve uninsured or untraceable drivers. And the MIBI acts as kind of a safety net to ensure that innocent road users are not left to carry the financial burden of someone else's negligence. However, it appears that the MIBI does not currently extend that protection to incidents involving e-scooters, as those vehicles are not required to have insurance. And accordingly, the victims of accidents involving e-scooters, which are the fault of the e-scooter user, may be left without a viable avenue for compensation. And that situation is pretty troubling when compared to how similar cases are handled in the UK. There, the Motor Insurers Bureau confirmed back as far as 2020 that it would cover injuries caused by uninsured e-scooter operators. So in other words, a mechanism is in place in the UK to protect victims, even though private e-scooters are not generally legal for public use. And the contrast between those two situations is pretty striking, and it's quite ironic. In Ireland, e-scooters are now legal for public use, but victims of accidents may find themselves with no practical means of recovering damages. And then in the UK, where e-scooters remain broadly restricted, the MIB has stepped in to ensure that injured parties can still access compensation. And I think that discrepancy underscores a pretty significant policy gap in Irish legislation that demands urgent attention. And then I suppose in conclusion, the legal landscape for e-scooters has undergone significant changes both in Ireland and the UK in the last few years. Each country has adopted distinct approaches to regulation, and both nations have sought to address the growing popularity of e-scooter users. but their methods and timelines for implementing appropriate legal frameworks have differed, and it reflects some challenges each country faces in balancing this innovation with public safety. And in Ireland, the regulatory framework for e-scooters is more defined with the introduction of the e-scooter regulations. But these regulations aim to ensure the e-scooter is safer and more organised. But the new rules, while they promise greater clarity, there's concerns remain about the safety of other road users and pedestrians in particular. And a significant issue that many e-scooter operators, particularly those in the early stages of the transition, may be very young and lack the necessary experience and maturity and responsibility to operate a potentially hazardous vehicle in a public space. The risk posed by inexperienced riders, combined with the lack of a robust system for monitoring and enforcing the rules, and also for compensating those who are injured by e-scooter users. It really underlines the need for further safeguards and education programs aimed to ensure that e-scooter operators are adequately prepared for the responsibilities of using those types of vehicles in a public space. And in contrast, the UK has maintained a more straightforward approach. Private e-scooters, while they're not permitted on public roads, are available for approved rental e-scooter schemes, and it is encouraged that e-scooter operators would undertake programs to educate them on safety and using these devices in public. And of course, there is the requirement to have third-party insurance, which does protect other road users in the event that there is an accident. But I think that Ireland and the UK have made important strides in general in regulating e-scooters. I don't think they're going away anytime soon. And it's pretty clear from the statistics and ongoing discussions that more regulation is needed to ensure that e-scooter operators and other road users are still safe. And in particular, as scooter usage continues to rise, we really could do with the introduction of some safety measures, such as mandatory training programs and a stricter enforcement of speed limits, and some maybe enhanced public awareness campaigns to mitigate the risks associated with e-scooter use. But I think that's all I have to say, really. But if anyone has any questions, I'll try my best to answer them. And thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Gillian. Absolutely fascinating. So I've got a question in the. I'm not sure if that's a question or just a thank you. Let's have a look at the chat. Just a message from David saying thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to Foyle for hosting. Would anybody like to ask a question to Gillian? You can either ask it, through the chat, or you can ask. It's not face to face, obviously, but you can ask live if you like. I
should say as well, if anyone perhaps thinks of something after the presentation is over, I'd be happy to answer any questions by email as well. Lawrence, you feel free to give out my email if you wish.
Sure. Hi, Ruth.
Hi, Lawrence. Hi, Gillian.
Hi, Ruth.
Thanks. That was really good. A really good whistle-stop tour around scooters on both sides of the Irish Sea. But I just wanted to ask you, did you say that the MIB in the UK are indemnifying illegal scooters as well as privately rented scooters?
I don't think I specified that, Ruth, but I think what the case is that they are, I suppose it all stems from uninsured damage caused by uninsured operation of vehicles. So I suppose in that situation, then I suppose it is legal operators that are being covered as well. But I would, I suppose, have to double check that. But that's my understanding of the situation anyway.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well, actually. As it happens, I had a meeting with the MIB about 3-4 weeks ago, and they were making a big noise about the fact that they are, paying compensation to the victims of e-scooters where the e-scooter is uninsured.
Illegally used outside the rental schemes,
Yeah, because it's classified as a road vehicle. So, there's many instances of vehicles being used illegally, but they're still being picked up as the MIB, because it sees its role as being a haven of last resort. So
if there's nobody else liable.
That is my understanding, but we've got a good line into the MIB if you want me to double check that. I'm sure that's right, because they were complaining about the difficulties presented, and I think they've recently had a couple of really, really large fatal claims as well that they were having to deal with.
Yeah, well, that's helpful. That's my understanding too. So if you could, get any more clarification, confirmation, but proceed on that basis. Thank you.
Then we've got a question in the chat from John Guy. It says, Gillian, do you see the UK making any move to relax the e-scooter rules beyond restriction to rental schemes?
I mean, I think the fact that they have the rental schemes in the first place indicates that there's some desire there to make them more broadly available. And I think that's the whole purpose of the rental schemes, is to kind of gather the data that they need to then kind of give the go-ahead for the use of private e-scooters on roads. So I would say yes. I would say this is probably likely to take off in most places. And certainly, like when you go abroad, you do see rental schemes in a number of different countries. So I think generally there's kind of a growing acceptance of e-scooters as part of the vehicles that we will see on the roads in the future. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Gillian. Any other questions? Can't see any other hands up or any other questions in the chat. So I think we can wrap that up. So thanks again, Gillian. That was really, really interesting, fascinating sort of contrast between the two jurisdictions. So thank you very much for that. Everybody else, I suspect that by virtue of the fact that you've got an invitation to this event, you have already registered your account with Foil. But if you haven't, please do go onto our website and register your own account, and encourage colleagues to do the same. As I say, the recording of this will be loaded up onto the website. Gillian's also kindly shared her slides with us, so we can send those slides around at the same time as we notify the loading of the recording onto the website. So unless there's anything else, I'll just wrap up and thank you everybody once again, and particularly thank you to you, Gillian.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye.